All right, the man with a plan for America happens to be in Argentina. I wonder if he's available. Javier Milei, Argentinian president, announced yesterday that he is banning the use of Marxist gender neutral language in government documents. He's the anti animatronic Anthony Blinken. The prohibition targets all inclusive language. I mean, I just love this guy. Targets all inclusive language and everything related to the gender perspective throughout the national public administration. His critics are saying this is a distraction from economic woes. So those critics are the party responsible for the economic woes, whose executive order on language he is reversing. So this is what I love. It's not a distraction when Anthony Blinken issues a memo to State Department employees saying don't use mom and dad. It is a distraction when Javier Milei says we're just going to use the language that actually reflects the reality we all understand: man, woman, he, her, etc. It's always politics when somebody else does it, other than the left. And by the way, just to put a fine point on it, the ban is a reversal of the measures introduced by the previous leftist presidents, de Kirchner and Alberto Fernandez, the latter, whose son recently changed his official gender to non-binary. Of course he did. His dad should follow suit. The move comes after Milei shuttered Argentina's Ministry of Women, Genders, and Diversity in December. Can you imagine? Why don't we have one of those? We might. I mean, I know college campuses do. They call it different things, but we basically do. You're right.
What is the title again?
The Ministry of Women, Genders, and Diversity.
Oh, okay.
I mean, Ayn Rand isn't this creative. And then he also, in February, shuttered the National Institute Against Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Racism. I mean, you can't combat discrimination and xenophobia and racism without an institute. That's what I always say. Oh, man. I mean, Milei is living up to advanced billing so far, mainly his own advanced billing, but very helpful. He is like to culture in the West right now what Florida was to COVID. For more on all of this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Andrew Klavan, who recently wrote at his Substack, The New Jerusalem, a pretty good think piece, as he always does, thoughtful work, on the use of the language, including proper Shakespeare references, which I always appreciate. Andrew Klavan's an author, screenwriter. He's also the host of The Andrew Klavan Show at the Daily Wire. Andrew joins us now. Andrew, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
It's great to be here, guys. Thanks.
So I mean, I just the contrast this week between what's going on with Milei and Argentina and the memo for just the latest example issued by Tony Blinken.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people on the right or people who just believe in common sense realize how much the way language is used affects what happens to us. When you pass a law that says every person should be allowed to take birth control pills and not mention the fact that these pills are for women, essentially, you're basically eliminating an entire sex. I mean, the idea that when my friend Matt Walsh asks, what is a woman, that we don't know, that we really have to define that word. We don't have to define that word. We know exactly what it means. What they're doing is they're undermining the entire human experience. They're using a false idea of science. Science tells us that things are not exactly the way we look at them. So you start out and you say, well, gee, the earth looks like it's flat, but it's really round. The sun looks like it's passing over the sky, but it's really the earth that's turning. And then pretty soon you start to say, well, you know, abortion seems like it might be killing a person, but isn't really a person. And you say, well, marriage looks like it should be between a man and a woman, but isn't a guy and a dog, isn't that really a marriage too? And the way they get together. And you start to, you know, incest. What's really wrong? Why it seems wrong that a guy should sleep with his sister, but is it really wrong? And language begins to lose its meaning because reality begins to lose its meaning. And the left has been playing off this philosophy, and it's a genuine philosophy, by the way. It's not just, they're not just being irrational. They actually don't believe that the things that we see that are wrong are wrong. They think that our perception is always off and can be changed any way they want. That's why the left plays with language all the time. We're not leftists, we're not socialists, we're progressives. We're progressives, like emphysema is progressive, and and so we're always on our back feet because we doubt our own experience. Science, in a way, has taught us to doubt our own moral experience. But in fact, human beings are made to see right and wrong. We're not always right. We have to think about it. We have to pray on it. We have to have a way of finding our way forward. But
we have to consult. We have to consult Gemini AI to make sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a really good example in a way, because Gemini AI, people are blaming Gemini AI for saying stupid stuff, but it's just a machine. It's the stuff that was fed into it by human beings that's stupid. And when it comes out and misrepresents reality by showing George Washington as a black person, the guy who programmed the machine should be questioning himself, not the AI. It's not we have to fix the AI. We have to fix the philosophy of the people programming the AI. So my only point, I think that our Christian background should remind us that when you have a God who can incarnate himself as a human being, there is something about the human experience that is very real. When we think, this feels immoral to me, we should listen to that. We shouldn't be talked out of our morality by people who are talking too fast for us to understand them, by people who have philosophized morality away. We're killing almost 1 million babies a year in this country, and people are going to the polls to vote and saying that's a human right. It's a human right to kill a baby inside you. And the minute you say that, they say, well, it's not a baby. It's a fetus. They change the words because they think that the emotional weight of the words is what matters. But no, what we see is what is, unless you can actually prove that that's not a living person inside your body, that's what it is. And so, I think that we don't understand on the right often enough how much their philosophy holds together if there's no God. If really reality is anything we say it is, if morality is anything we say it is, then the left is right. It's not, you're not a woman because you're born with a woman's body. Richard Levine just has to put on a dress and a string of pearls and he becomes Rachel Levine. They're right about that if we don't think that there is something very, very real about our experiences and the language we use to describe that experience. One of the things I wrote in my piece about that I like to bring up is, I don't know how many people still remember the comedian George Carlin, a very funny comedian, but he used to have this routine, the 7 words you can't say on television. And the routine worked like this. He would get up and just start cursing, the string of 7 horrible curse words, until those words stopped meaning anything. And it was very funny. And the point was that we're irrationally banning these words. There's nothing inherently bad about these words. But that's just not true. You shouldn't get your philosophy from comedians. You should get your laughs from comedians, but not your philosophy. It's not true. If I can use the word pine tree and put into your mind the picture of a pine tree, I can use a 4-letter word for sex and dehumanize sex and tell you that sex is just a physical process with no moral, weight to it, with no relational weight to it. That's what happens when you use a 4-letter word for sex. And so words mean things because our experience means things, and we use words as tools to communicate our experience to one another. And when people start to say they don't know what the word woman means, it's because they're not a biologist, as one of our Supreme Court justices said. They're actually saying something very dangerous. They're actually negating our entire experience of life and therefore our moral senses. And they mean to do it. They philosophically believe our moral senses are not worthwhile. And that's the level that we have to fight them on, because if we don't fight them on the philosophical level, we'll basically lose.
So with these words, ever going to go back to normal? Like, I am a mother. I am not a birthing parent or a birthing person. Are we
parental unit.
Right.
Well, they go back to meaning what they mean if people have the courage to stand up for them. And this is the problem we have on the right, is that people can be cowed into saying, well, I don't know what a woman means. They can be frightened because they're going to lose their job. They're going to be called down to HR if they don't use the right pronoun. This is why Jordan Peterson is fighting with Canada, not because he's unkind to people who are, mistaken about their sex. It's because he won't be forced to use use pronouns that don't describe the world as he sees it, because he trusts his own experience of life. So when women allow themselves to be erased by guys like Dylan Mulvaney, they're actually doing something both wrong and harmful to themselves, but also wrong and harmful to the rest of us. They have to stand up and say, no, you're not a woman. For instance, I don't think any female sports team, should play against an opponent that has a man on his team. They should absolutely boycott and forfeit every single game. Every female team across the country should do it. No one should, not just for safety's sake, for reality's sake, for the sake of the dignity of womanhood. It is deeply offensive, just as it's offensive when somebody puts on blackface. It's deeply offensive when Dylan Mulvaney puts on a skirt and makeup and says, oh, I'm a girl, and they put him on the cover of a magazine.
Yeah, but we don't act that way.
That's right.
Well,
that's right. We don't stand up to them.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing: we don't, and we don't even appreciate what you're saying. So it seems to me now, so we never see it coming. Some of us.
That's right.
We never see pedophiles are what do we call them now? Minor attracted persons. Yeah, right. I mean, but it's like no. But you say that somebody's like, what? What's going on? What's happening? So we and to me, I recently wrote about this in the context of what that Politico national correspondent Heidi Prisabillo said about Christians versus Christian nationalism. So we allowed marriage to be redefined out of existence, and this is the way to destroy something. Just redefine it out of existence. So marriage, biological sex, and now Christianity and America's origin story is next. And that Politico reporter really gave us an insight when she distinguished between Christians and the Christian nationalists who are Trump supporters. The Christian nationalist is someone who believes that our rights come from God and not the state, essentially, is what she said. And those are the people that are the problem. They're not the true Christians. The true Christians are people that necessarily properly believe that our rights come from government. That's the next. So strip away your understanding of the founding documents, strip away your understanding of Christianity, strip away your belief in God. That's the next, the next threshold they're going to cross.
Right, because see, this is it's so important. Then it's like we have been talked out of the idea that we can argue from the point of view of God's existence. But it's really up to them to prove that God doesn't exist. We're living in a creation. We're living in an incredibly complex thing. It didn't come out of nothing. If you can show me anything that came out of nothing, I'll believe that the world came out of nothing. It obviously is the creation of a consciousness. So we have to cling to that, because that's the underlying source of our rights and of our moral understanding. And I know it's a difficult thing to get through to people, because we've lived so long in a country where they've said that God is not allowed in the public square. And I think that is where a lot of this begins. And I'm not trying to be a Bible thumping, fundamentalist and say, oh, here's a verse in the Bible, this is how you have to live. That's not the point. The point is that the world that as we understand it, is a spiritual world. There's this intellectual, Yuval Harari, who goes over to the World Economic Forum. They love him there. And he says, people don't have any rights. Cut a person open. You won't find any rights inside him. Well, that's something so stupid that only an intellectual could say it. Of course you don't cut people open and find their rights inside. People are bodies, but those bodies are expressing something more than what is inside them, just like a car is more than the machinery inside them. You can take a car apart, but you can't drive it. You can take a person apart, but he's no longer a person. We are an entire thing, and we are the expression of spirit, and that spirit definitely can be proved to have rights. The thing that the Declaration says is these rights are self-evident. You don't even have to prove them. It is just evident that you have a right to life, because I have a right to life. And that's what makes it so obvious. But these people feel that all the things that we see in one another, the love we feel for one another, the respect we have for one another, the respect we have for people's rights, those things are not there because you can't see them. You can't smell them. You can't touch them. That's a very, very stupid philosophy. And yet it is the philosophy of most of our intellectuals, most of our academics. And the ordinary folks don't have the language with which to fight back because they use these complicated languages. It sounds like they're saying something important. It sounds like, well, they're too smart for me to argue with. I hear this all the time, by the way. I've traveled across the entire country, and I hear people say, I don't know. I'm not a smart guy. I didn't go to college. I don't have the words to argue with these people. And my feeling is no. You have your common sense. You see what you see. You know what you are. Don't be talked out of this by a bunch of people with credentials but no common sense. It really is important that we begin with God. It really is. And it's so obvious that we're living in a creation that we shouldn't be talked out of it by people who think they're smarter than we are. They're not. They are maybe more educated than we are. They maybe know their field better than we do. But the things that we see, the immorality that we see, the things that our words mean, man, woman, marriage, these are things that we understand and we know. We don't need some professor to tell us they don't exist. It's simple nonsense.
Andrew Klavan, author, screenwriter, host of The Andrew Klavan Show at the Daily Wire, and his Substack is The New Jerusalem. Andrew, thanks as always. Appreciate it.
Great talking to you, Dan. Thanks.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening to Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Pure Talk believes in American values and that free should mean exactly that, free. Well, switch to Pure Talk today and you'll get a free Samsung 5G smartphone. Now, qualifying plans start at just $35 a month for unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of data, and, of course, mobile